Enslaved, the Israelites cry for freedom. The Israelites, God's chosen people, were enslaved in Egypt. They toiled day and night under the scorching sun, their hands calloused and their spirits broken. The weight of their chains was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual as well. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, made them build cities and work the fields. He was relentless, showing no mercy, and his overseers were equally harsh. The Israelites were forced to construct grand monuments and vast storehouses, their sweat and tears mixing with the mortar. Their lives were filled with hardship and sorrow. Every day was a struggle for survival, and every night was filled with dreams of freedom that seemed increasingly distant. Families were torn apart, and the cries of children echoed through the labor camps. They cried out to God for deliverance from their suffering. Their prayers were filled with desperation and hope, a plea for a miracle to end their torment. They gathered in secret, whispering their prayers, hoping that the Almighty would hear their cries. Years turned into decades, and hope began to dwindle. The older generation passed on their stories of a promised land to their children, but as time went on, even the most faithful began to doubt. The weight of their suffering seemed endless, and the light at the end of the tunnel grew dim. Yet their pleas did not go unanswered. In the midst of their despair, a glimmer of hope began to shine. Whispers of a deliverer, a savior sent by God, began to spread among the people. This hope was fragile but powerful, a beacon in their darkest hours. God heard the cries of the Israelites and promised to free them. He saw their suffering and was moved by their faith. The promise of liberation was not just a distant dream, but a divine assurance. God vowed to lead them out of bondage and into freedom. He would lead them to a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of their own. This land was not just a physical place, but a symbol of hope, prosperity, and divine favor. It represented a future where they could live in peace and worship freely. This promise gave the Israelites a glimmer of hope in their desperate situation. It was a light in the darkness, a reason to endure the hardships of each day. They held on to this promise with unwavering faith, believing that their deliverance was near. They clung to the belief that God would one day deliver them from their bondage. This faith sustained them through the darkest times, giving them the strength to continue. The Israelites' cry for freedom was not just a plea for physical liberation, but a testament to their enduring spirit and unshakable faith in God's promise. A prophet arises, Moses and the Pharaoh's defiance. God chose Moses, a Hebrew raised in the Pharaoh's court, to lead the Israelites out of slavery. From his infancy, Moses was set apart for a divine purpose. Rescued from the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter, he grew up amidst the splendor and power of Egypt, yet his heart remained with his people, the Hebrews. Moses, guided by God, confronted Pharaoh, demanding the release of his people. With unwavering faith, he stood before the ruler of the most powerful empire of the time, delivering God's command, "Let my people go." Pharaoh, arrogant and powerful, scoffed at Moses' request. He saw himself as a god above all others and dismissed the idea that any deity could challenge his authority. "Who is this God that I should obey him?" he retorted. His words dripped with disdain, reflecting his belief in his own invincibility and the might of his gods. With a hardened heart, Pharaoh refused to free the Israelites. He turned away from Moses, unwilling to acknowledge the power of the God of the Hebrews. Undeterred, Moses, empowered by God, unleashed a series of plagues upon Egypt. Each plague was a direct challenge to the Egyptian gods and a demonstration of the true God's supremacy. Each plague, a display of God's power, targeted the Egyptians' arrogance and their false gods. The once mighty empire began to crumble under the weight of divine retribution. The Nile turned to blood, its life-giving waters transformed into a symbol of death and judgment. Swarms of locusts devoured their crops, leaving the land barren and the people desperate. And darkness enveloped the land, a palpable, oppressive darkness that could be felt, a stark contrast to the light of God's presence with the Israelites. Yet Pharaoh remained unmoved, his heart hardened against the suffering of the Israelites. Despite the overwhelming evidence of God's power, he clung to his pride and defiance, setting the stage for the ultimate showdown between divine will and human obstinacy. Exodus, flight from Egypt. After the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh finally relented. The Egyptians, devastated by the loss of their children, urged the Israelites to leave. With haste and trepidation, the Israelites fled Egypt, carrying their meager possessions and the hope of freedom. Moses, their leader, guided them towards the Red Sea, the only path to escape Pharaoh's reach. Pharaoh's pursuit, the Israelites trapped. Pharaoh, filled with regret and rage, quickly changed his mind. He could not bear the thought of losing his slaves. He assembled his chariots and soldiers, the mightiest army in the world, and set out in hot pursuit of the fleeing Israelites. The Israelites, trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching Egyptian army, were filled with fear and despair. They cried out to Moses, "Was it not better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness?" Section 5. Miracle at the Red Sea waters divide. Moses, facing the wrath of the Israelites and the imminent threat of the Egyptian army, remained steadfast in his faith. The Israelites, trapped between the advancing Egyptian forces and the vast expanse of the Red Sea, were gripped by fear and despair. They questioned Moses, doubting their decision to leave Egypt, where they had been enslaved but alive. The tension was palpable, and the cries of the people echoed across the shoreline. God commanded him, "Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground." Moses, with unwavering faith, listened to the divine instruction. He knew that this moment was pivotal, not just for him, but for the entire nation of Israel. The staff in his hand was more than a piece of wood. It was a symbol of God's promise and power. With unwavering obedience, Moses raised his staff towards the heavens. The sky above seemed to respond, darkening with the weight of the moment. The wind began to howl, and the sea roared in anticipation. Every eye was on Moses, every heart beat with a mix of hope and fear. The air was thick with expectation, and time seemed to stand still. As if responding to Moses' command, a powerful wind swept across the Red Sea, splitting the waters apart. The wind was fierce, yet controlled, as if guided by an unseen hand. The waters, which moments before had seemed an insurmountable barrier, now stood like walls on either side, creating a path of dry land. The sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a clear demonstration of divine intervention. The Israelites watched in awe and disbelief as a path, dry ground, appeared before them, stretching through the heart of the sea. They hesitated at first, unable to comprehend the miracle unfolding before their eyes. But as the reality of their salvation dawned on them, they began to move, first tentatively, then with growing confidence. Families held on to each other, children clung to their parents, and the elderly were supported by the strong. Together they stepped onto the dry path, leaving behind the life of bondage and stepping into the promise of freedom. The miracle, a testament to God's power and faithfulness, filled the Israelites with renewed hope and courage. As they walked through the parted waters, their hearts swelled with gratitude and reverence. The journey was not just a physical passage, but a spiritual awakening. They were reminded of God's unwavering presence and His promise to lead them to a land flowing with milk and honey. The Red Sea crossing became a defining moment in their history, a story of deliverance that would be told for generations to come. Section 6. Safe Passage Journey Through the Seabed. With hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, the Israelites stepped onto the seabed, the walls of water towering on either side of them. The ground beneath their feet was dry and firm, a testament to the miraculous nature of their escape. They pressed forward, their steps echoing through the eerie silence of the parted sea, their eyes fixed on the opposite shore, their promised land. Section 7. Pharaoh's army engulfed. The waters return. Pharaoh's army, emboldened by their chariots and their confidence in their military might, charged into the parted sea, pursuing the fleeing Israelites. They raced across the seabed, their chariots kicking up dust, their voices filled with the clamor of war. But their pursuit was short-lived. As the last of the Israelites reached the opposite shore, Moses lowered his staff. The walls of water, no longer held back by the divine wind, crashed down upon the pursuing Egyptians. The sea roared back into place, swallowing Pharaoh's army and all its might. Section 8. Significance of the miracle, deliverance and faith. The parting of the Red Sea was more than just an escape. It was a defining moment in the history of the Israelites. It was a display of God's power over nature and over the mightiest army on earth. It was a sign of God's covenant with his chosen people, a promise of deliverance and protection. The miracle instilled in the Israelites a profound sense of faith and gratitude. Section 9, A Timeless Tale, The Enduring Legacy of the Red Sea. The story of the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea has resonated through the ages, inspiring hope and courage in the face of adversity. It serves as a reminder of the power of faith and the possibility of overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. The Red Sea, a symbol of both danger and deliverance, continues to hold a powerful place in the hearts and minds of people around the world.